RTA.
And I would have.
Joanne, Steve McGovern. James John, RTA.
Natalie Shuck, Pima County Environmental Quality.
Paul Masacano, Pima County Transportation.
Captain Skinner, Pima County Transportation.
Jamie Ramapak.
Sonia Kelly with PAG.
Jeanette Ramapak.
City of Tucson. And online, I see that, let's start with Adam.
Hey, Adam Ledford with PAG.
Thanks, Adam. Dan?
Dan Grossman, Town of Marana.
Thanks, Dan. The other Dan?
Dan Gabbio, Federal Highways.
Thanks, Dan. Josue?
Hey everybody, good morning. Josue Licea, City of South Tucson.
Thank you, Josue. Paul?
Paul Burton, Town of Sahuarita.
Thank you, Paul. And Jennifer?
Jennifer Hobart with ADA.
Thank you, Jennifer. Anyone else that I didn't call? Oh, Machado?
Paul Machado, Tucson Airport Authority.
Great, thanks, Paul. There's one caller number, 480-486.
That's actually me, Jennifer Hobart. I'm called in and on the computer.
All right, great. Thanks so much. And one more in the room here.
Yeah, Foster Burrell, Town of Marana.
All right, thank you, Fausto. And also want to extend a welcome to Anthony, the new division administrator for ADOT, replacing Ron Lane. Welcome to TPC.
Thank you.
Glad you're here. Yep. All right, with that, we will go on to item 2, in-kind reporting. Jeanette?
Great. Regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated to Bristol. Can you move the little box? All right, I'll start over. Regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. If you're paid with federal dollars, please let us know. Time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting materials. At the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. Time spent working on PAG RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. Sonia has sent around the sign-in sheet, so please make sure you sign in before you leave. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Jeanette. Let's move on to item 3, approval of the August 21st, 2024 meeting summary. Have you all had a chance to review, and do you have any comments or questions before we ask for a motion to approve? All right, hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the meeting summary from August 21st?
Motion to approve.
That's a motion. Is there a second?
Paul Burton, second.
Thanks, Paul. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes. Let's move on to item 4, Transportation Improvement Program update. Jamie Brown. Jamie?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to provide a verbal update on the Transportation Improvement Program. We did send out a brief email last month to the TPC with regard to the FY25 through 29 tip. So wanted to speak to that, give you the latest update as well as talk about the fiscal year rollovers and a reminder about federal funding. So in terms of the FY25 through 29 tip, as you may all recall, the Regional Council approved that tip in late May with the condition that we resolve air quality conformity issues that were brought to our attention in May by the EPA. And so since that time, we've been working with staff of EPA and the Federal Highway Administration to resolve those air quality conformity issues for the PM10 non-attainment area, the Rito PM10 non-attainment area. And the latest direction that we received is that we need to make more adjustments to the model inputs. We've got specific direction on which inputs we needed to modify, rerun the model, and then put those results in the TIP document. At that time, we should be able to do two things simultaneously. One is to conduct a 15-day public comment period on those revised sections of the tip, as well as submit the tip to the Federal Highway Administration for their review, and depending on the comments that we receive after that 15-day comment period, FHWA should be poised to provide an air quality conformity determination and approve the tip. Once that tip is approved, we will inform the TPC so that you know that we can then resume processing tip amendments. And on the line, we have, of course, Jennifer Hobart, Dan Gabbio. We've got Dustin here in the room to also answer any questions, but that's a brief status update on that. I guess I'll ask Dan, is there anything that I missed or you'd like to add to my brief summary?
No, Jamie, I think you covered it all well. Hopefully we'll be able to wrap it up here in short order. But I think at this point, PAG has addressed all the concerns brought up by the federal partners. And I think we should be good to go here pretty soon. So thanks, Jamie, Dustin, and team for all your hard work.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, yes, to Federal Highway Administration, EPA, and everybody else we've been working with to resolve these issues in a timely manner. Moving on to a related item, the tip rollovers. Just wanted to let everyone know about the status of that process. As most of you probably know, at the end of the fiscal year, we determine what the expenditures are for HERF and RTA, and then the unexpended amount that would be rolled forward to the next fiscal year. And so we set a deadline of July 31st for all submissions of FY24 invoices for those two funding sources, after which time James has been following up with member agencies to confirm those amounts and other details. And we're in a good position to finalize that. We'd like to finalize the tip rollover process once we have the approved FY25 through 29 tip to work with. And I know James has got a few numbers he wants to share that are preliminary, but in terms of the aggregate amounts of the HERF and RTA rollovers. James?
Thank you, Jamie. Mr. Chair. So for FY24, our total RTA TPT expenditures were $15,496,000. Total 12-bar or 12-bar or 12-6 expenditures were $4,884,000. $166,515,000 of RTA TPT will carry over to FY25, and $79,734,000 of HERF will carry forward to FY25. So the total carry forward of TPT and HERF is $246,250,000.
Thank you, James. And the final thing we wanted to mention for this agenda item is with regard to TIP policies and procedures and federal funding. So the TIP policies and procedures has had a long-standing policy that basically asks that our member agencies inform PAG if they're unable to obligate funds, federal funds, namely SDBG funds that are programmed in that fiscal year. And so we've had a deadline of let's see, it was March 1st. We're in a situation where we just have fewer and fewer options to deal with large sums of SDBG and also comply with the direction to program those SDBG funds on RTA road projects, right? So we have advanced that deadline, and that's in the FY25 through 29 tip and the TIP policies and procedures to October 31st. If the sums are $3 million or greater, we ask member agencies inform us if they would be unable to obligate in that current fiscal year. That just gives us more time to work out solutions. We had a complicated exchange that we were able to work through last fall, but it involved a non-RTA project, and then we were ultimately able to make that work. But just wanted to make everybody aware of that change in the deadline. And with that, that concludes my report. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thanks so much, Jamie. I do have a question on the tip approval. Do you have a just target date on when you think, given some of the timeframes you mentioned, that you all are looking to have this approved by?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I think that by early next week, we should be in a position to commence that 15-day public comment period and submit the tip to FHWA. It sounds like FHWA can do a concurrent review. So following those 15 days, in a matter of days, we should have, if everything goes smoothly, have an approved tip. So late September, early October.
Great, thank you very much. Natalie?
Would you or any PAC staff be able to elaborate on the changes in the model inputs?
Thank you for that question, and maybe I'll defer to Dustin for any details on the changes to the model.
Yeah, thanks for the question. The revisions were to the age distribution for certain source type vehicles, so motorcycles, passenger cars, motorhomes. Using that local data from ADOT MVD provided data versus default data. The moves runs have been rerun. It adjusted the overall PM10 by a couple tenths of a ton out of 200 plus tons. So the table 6 for the action scenario outputs for 2029, 2035, and 2045 out into the future, those totals will be slightly adjusted. So that was the latest change that we performed.
They're originally using data.
Yeah, the defaults were originally used.
Okay.
So those have been replaced by local. We used that for the source type population, but not the age distribution.
Okay. Will this committee be formally notified of that public comment period when it opens?
Certainly, yes.
Any other questions for Jamie or the staff?
Sure.
Yes, Jose.
Once it's you guys resolve these issues with EPA, does it have to go back to the council approval?
No, thank you for that question, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So the motion that was on screen at the May 30th Regional Council meeting had Regional Council approving the FY25 through 29 tip and then authorizing the executive director to make final approval pending the resolution of these issues. So it does not need to go back to Regional Council.
Thank you.
Good question. Any other questions? Any online? All right, great. Thank you so much for those updates. We'll move on to item 5, lead agency status updates on FERF 12.6 funded projects. There's no staff lead on that, so okay. All right.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'll introduce this item, but and we'll turn it over to the lead agencies to provide updates. So this agenda item was requested at the July TPC meeting. After the presentation on the Regional Transportation Revenues Report, there were comments about the FERF 12.6 balance in the ADOT report that's approaching $100 million. And I think there were committee members wanted to just learn more about what the status is of those projects that have significant funding, HERF funding program. So those are the RTA roadway element projects. And so we're not through the rollover process. So we did ask for updates on those projects that have funding programmed in fiscal years 24 and 25. And that would be the town of Marana and the city of Tucson based on our records, what's programmed. And yeah, I think we all acknowledge that, we're approaching a really high number, but also understand that these funds are committed to RTA projects that are going to be moving forward. So happy to answer questions related to the funding, but I think the primary purpose of this agenda item is to hear those updates. And so turn it over to maybe the town of Marana first to provide an update on the Tangerine Road project. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to do so, Chairman, members. Yeah, so currently we're talking about our Tangerine Road project. It was originally a 2-phase project going from I-10 to La Cañada, approximately 10 miles. First phase was from Dove Mountain East to La Cañada. That was completed in 2018. So now we're working on our second phase, which we have further broken into 2 phases, as obviously funding and costs of associated projects. So this is going to be from I-10 East, approximately 2 miles. We're calling it Tangerine Road Phase 2A widening.
So yes, currently that project, total cost is approaching about 47 million with 35 million going towards construction. NTP was just released in July, so early July. Our contractor was given the NTP with an anticipated completion of 2026. Currently, we're working on joint utility trenching, approximately about 60% complete as part of the project construction cycle. We need to have the joint utility trench in place, and we're also TEP is placing poles as they need to shift their poles to east or south to get them beyond where the roadway will be. They're placing new poles. However, obviously, we're going through the summer months. They will not shut down their power during those times. So after October, they will then start moving the lines and obviously removing the poles the old poles and replace the new ones. That will allow the project to start building the eastbound lanes, and then we'll start shifting traffic and such. It's also substantial drainage in the phase 2A and 2B area. So they're also going to commence working on that drainage. So the project is in full bloom. We're just right now getting some utilities moved over. In regards to funding in 12.6 specifically, we do have approximately 9 million programmed into this project, and a PO associated with that funds has been provided to Borderland. To date, nothing has been expensed against this because this will be when they actually get into the roadway construction. So yeah, as the spreadsheet showed, there was approximately about 4 million in 2024 identified, about 4.7 in 25, and 340,000 in fiscal year 26. And again, so we do plan on utilizing those funds in the near future.
Thank you, Mr. Burrell. Any questions for Mr. Burrell, Town of Marina staff?
Question. Go ahead.
I was gonna ask about phase 2B and the cost of that and if that's fully funded.
So currently phase 2B, we're still assessing that project. As you know, funds have escalated, so we're looking to see how we're going to cover those costs. So to answer your question, currently, no, all the funds are associated with 2A. Originally, the plan was designed the entirety and then to build it in phases. However, we've had some jurisdictional affiliation issues and state land issues that we're trying to overcome. So we put the pause on the 2B design at this point.
The interest would be about the same amount because the 2B would be about 3 miles long, right?
It's about 3 miles long. Yes, this first phase is about 2, second about 3. Not as much challenges with the railroad in that interface. However, substantial drainage challenges and probably larger structures associated with that as far as crossing the roadway. So we're anticipating a similar price point.
50 million.
Yeah.
You remember what the first phase was from Twin Peaks to La Cañada?
You know, I do not. I don't recall what the price point was on that.
Trying to see the overall picture because this is the tangerine on the RTA that was various period.
Right.
If I remember correctly, that was like $70 million.
I want to say around 60 million was the price point, somewhere there 60 to 70, but obviously now we're looking at closer to 50 for a 2 mile stretch. So things have changed quite a bit.
Also, is the Tangerine Road project, is that all one project in the RTA, one corridor, and then you broke it up into
It
phases?
was correct. It was one corridor. It was phased into the original 2 phases, and we then sub-phasing, if you will. There's also, I guess, for this group, there's an interface with the I-10. We're going to do an interim improvement, not part of the RTA project, but obviously to capture the lanes and allow more operational throughput, we are going to do some improvements to the TI. Similar to what you've seen at Cortero to allow us to gain capacity until we can do a full-blown reconstruction or until the state.
Is it working on 2B at all, or is it just on hold?
2B currently has been put on halt. I think we're at about a 30% plan set, but right now we're concentrating on 2A.
There's no schedule as to when you anticipate starting on that one? Is that the one that we're just gonna push out to like?
It has been pushed out to the further years. Yes, currently there is no
126
schedule.
right on the corner.
I think we identified 28, but
Right.
yeah.
And you only got about what? $9 million out of the 12.6. About less than 10% of the
Yeah,
80 some odd $1 million, 12.6.
For the current phase. That's my understanding.
Okay.
yeah,
That's
currently,
not
that's
much.
what we have 9 million identified. So,
On the overall scheme, that's not a lot of money.
no,
But we compare 90 some $1 million. All right. Thanks.
thank you.
Anything else? Questions online? All right. We will, City of Tucson will give our update. I've invited Andy Bemis, Deputy Director, to assist me today in case I need some help here. I'll run through these projects. I'm not going to go into as much detail as Fausto did because we have quite a few projects, but I will give you an update on each of the projects. And then if you have any questions, you can certainly, we can dig in a little further. I'll do this in order of tip ID. So the first one is tip ID 16.15, which is Houghton Road, 22nd Street to Irvington. That project is, I believe it's 100% design. We're pretty much wrapped up with design. We're finalizing right-of-way acquisition and just a few properties, and then really going to kick off utility relocation in earnest here coming up very soon. Right now, that project is slated to start construction in about the middle of 2026. Our records show about 34 million of HERF 12R on that project. TIP ID 32, which is 22nd Street, Camino Seco to Houghton, is one of the final single projects in the last quarter of the RTA plan, and we are in design right now. We plan to complete design in the spring of 2026 with construction to follow shortly after. That has close to $30 million of HERF 12R. TIP ID 38, Harrison Road Bridge, another RTA project, standalone project, is currently in IGA initiation right now. In fact, it's our understanding this IGA will be on the September 26th RTA board meeting agenda. We'll start design shortly after that's approved, and that has about 13 million of HERF 12R. Grant phases 3 and 4. This is TIP ID 55.06. Has about 35 million of HERF 12R on it, and that is under construction. We're right now spending at a clip of about 1.5 million per month. Expect that to pick up in the coming months with completion expected for October of 2026. The next project is TIP ID 56.06, Silverbell Road. The corridor is granted to INA, but this is the Goray to El Camino del Cerro segment. Has about just shy of 32 million of HERF 12R. That project is nearing the end of design. We are working through a few issues with our 404 permit right now and working out a few details with Tucson Water. That one does need, I believe it needs an IGA amendment for us to be able to begin construction. Probably not going to see construction activities till the 2025 calendar year. Next project is TIP ID 60.06. This is Valencia Road, I-19 to Alvernon. Again, another standalone RTA project, has just a little over 2 million in HERF 12R. And again, this IGA is also expected to be on the RTA board agenda next week. First Avenue Grant to River is TIP ID 81.06. That has about 7.6 million of HERF 12R. That project is in the DCR phase right now. TIP ID 84.06, Grant Road, Union Pacific Railroad underpass project. It's a standalone RTA project, has a little over 16 million. That project is actually on hold right now. We had designed that project. Currently, it's actually it's coming in under budget by about $17 million, but the RTA has told the city of Tucson that portions of that project are ineligible for RTA reimbursement. So essentially that project's been put on hold until some folks can get together and figure out what to do to move that forward. And lastly, TIP ID 131 22nd Street Bridge has about 31 million of HERF 12R, and we are finalizing our funding authorization package. That one does have quite a bit of federal money, including the federal raise grant, as well as quite a bit of STP And so we are expecting that to start construction early 2025. And that's the extent of our list. Be happy to answer any questions. Also, we're hiring if you want to come help us.
I didn't know we could do that. Yeah, we're hiring.
Mr. Chair, the number you just gave right now, yeah, that's just the 12.6. Obviously, there's other.
Yeah, that's just the 12.6. So just to give you a sense, Jose, I think it's about $202 million of HERC 12R in total on all those projects. The biggest being 22nd Street Bridge, Silver Bell, 22nd Street, Camino Seco to Houghton, and Houghton Road.
It sounds like most of them are moving forward, all right?
We're moving forward. All of our remaining RTA projects are moving forward. That's correct. Yeah.
So I know Fausto mentioned, there was the 2B that is not a continuation into RTA next, but isn't fully funded. So is there anything in your list that isn't fully funded, but is not yet tagged for RTA next?
Yeah, I think the one glaring hole here is Grant 5.6 has absolutely no funding on it. And there's no discussion about that moving to RTA next. And while First Avenue does have a significant amount of funding on it to the tune of 74 million, that project is still under, there's still not enough money to deliver that project.
Which one was that first project you just mentioned?
Grant 5.6.
So these two projects are not fully funded then?
Not fully funded in the 5-year TIP and are not considered for RTA next.
Now, do you guys have an amount needed to fully fund those, or they're still in the works?
Yeah, neither are Houghton, Silver Bell, and
Yeah, so likely Houghton and Silver Bell are not going to have enough funding. For those two projects we talked about, Grant 5.6 and First Avenue, I think it's like 160 million short.
they're about.
They're about 160 million short. Yeah.
When you say Silver Bell, you mean the phase of Silver Bell grant to Del Cerro?
Correct.
Or Grid to
Yeah,
Del Cerro.
Not the difference.
That's correct. And same with Houghton, the 22nd to Irvington will likely need more funding, not the phase north of Broadway.
But a lot of these projects are going beyond the 2026, right?
Yeah, so I think all of them are going to be beyond 26. Houghton Road will start in 26, 22nd Street, Camino Seco to Houghton will start in 26. Harrison could potentially start sooner. Grant Road is going to extend into 26. Silver Bell will definitely extend into 26 and beyond. First Avenue likely is not going to start before 26. And Grant Road UPRR is unknown at this time. 22nd Street will extend into 26.
I remember if the project actually have to start in the construction phase to be in compliance with the RTA plan, or maybe just I can't remember. I believe it needs to.
So are you asking a question?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, so Rick Ellis, if maybe you could help to confirm this, but I believe it has to initiate construction.
Be in compliance with it.
Yeah, to be in compliance. Is that correct? Or?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, you just have to start construction. We define that by the issuance of the notice to proceed to the contractor. That's what we've been using as our definition for that. And that's been holding up. And as Sam reported, everything's on track and has those goals and targets in place, or they've already met compliance through the earlier phases that have been completed.
So it sounds like they'll start construction in 2026.
Yeah, so the two on here that I think are of most interest is the 22nd Street didn't have a prior phase. That will likely start construction before the end of the RTA plan. Same with Harrison, standalone project. Valencia I-19 to Alvernon as well. That is a standalone project that will start construction prior to that June 2026. date. Andy, you want to add?
Yeah, if I may, I think, there's some ambiguity when you look at the state statute. The section that's relevant to this portion of the RTA is about structuring the ballot. And it says that you are meant to describe all the projects in a phase. And so that's what was done for the sake of the ballot. And we have those goals where we want to hit those phases already within that. There's several in not only our jurisdiction that didn't necessarily start in that 4-year or 5-year phase. The board has already deferred projects out of those phases into future phases. And so I think we're making every effort to start everything as we can and moving critical path items forward.
Yes. You mentioned a couple projects that have IGAs that should be hitting the board. I know that's been a challenge historically. I know I prompted this item, I think partially, and Jose asked questions as well. And part of it was making sure that we're not hitting roadblocks unnecessarily. And I know that one potential delay is if you don't hit a board meeting, it's another 3 months delay. So I don't know if we have confirmation that those that we think are going to be there in a week are there or not, because it seems like it'd be really problematic.
Yes, those IGAs have been worked through at the staff level, and we've come to agreement on those, and the documents are prepared, and those will go out with the board packet anticipated for distribution tomorrow. And then Tucson has taken the step to already schedule it for, I believe, the October timeframe for mayor and council at the next available meeting following the board.
Point is really well taken, especially on one of those projects, the Valencia I-19 Alvernon, which is not out of prior phase, trying to get, broken ground. It's all supplanted funds at this point. So it's federally funded and HERF 12-6 funded, and we have a federal obligation deadline in FY 26. So we have a very tight timeline to finish the design on that. So it is really important we get those IGA timelines, our design schedule. There's really no slack in that.
Any other questions for Andy or Ash?
I guess I'll ask one more question. From the PAG side, I know when James made his report about how much was reimbursed last year, it's really minimal. Are there any invoices that PAG has that have unresolved issues, that have delayed reimbursement or anything that can be streamlined from that side?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Ms. Skinner, thank you for that question. Yes, so in terms of the HERF 12-6 invoices, a few factors that we should mention. So we did have a staffing change in the spring. Our lead for the processing of the invoices moved on. And so we've shuffled staff around and we've got a new lead for that. We're working as a team. So we have been in catch-up mode. But overall, in terms of the total amount that was submitted by the project sponsor for three projects, we've paid 71% of that. Now, keep in mind that we can't pay some of those invoices. For example, one project, the submissions were for right-of-way, but there's no right-of-way program in the TIP. So we notified the sponsor that they needed to request a TIP amendment. We're actually working through that through the rollover TIP amendment process to provide adequate capacity so that we could process those invoices. There were other examples where we had, we need to work through staff to reconcile maybe some missing paperwork or ineligible items, just make sure the packets are complete. So we did have to short pay in some cases as well. Lance Peterson is here if you have any more questions, or did I cover that? Okay, Lance, he's our new technical review lead for the reimbursements.
No, that sounded good, Jamie. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any in regards to the processing of these.
And I guess I would let the city respond to that too.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Lance?
Oh, I guess in terms of my report, does that sound accurate to the city?
I think that sounds about right. I think, Catherine, to your point, in terms of delay, I think, for example, the Valencia I-19 to Alvernon project is a good example where we went back and forth with the staff a lot because of the interpretation of what the scope for that project could be. And in our eyes, that's probably one of the more simpler projects in the RTA plan. It's just access control and traffic signal improvements and safety improvements. But yet we felt like there was a lot of roadblocks just to get to an understanding of the scope of work for that project to even be in a position to submit the IGA for approval by both governing bodies. And with the time crunch of the federal funds there, it puts us in a really, really tough position to deliver that project when we're, backed into a corner there. So, ultimately we agreed to move it forward with an understanding that let the design, sort of dictate what the scope of work's going to be on that. But again, in our eyes, that was pretty straightforward. We felt like we had a reasonable approach to the scope. And yet we had to jump through a lot of hoops with the RTA staff to be able to move that IGA forward. And that does seem to be kind of a common theme as we've been working through many of these projects. But nonetheless, our manager has been really clear that we will deliver the RTA projects. And so we just continue plugging along as best we can. Any other questions on this item? Paul?
I'll try to phrase this in the form of a question, but the examination of the HERF 12.6 is valuable and everything. But hearing the holes that have yet to be filled in a lot of the project delivery, and knowing that there's going to be some sort of cost to complete exercise that's taking place, I still am kind of unclear how or if this body will have any input into that process, especially being, the project delivery experts. I trust that you and your staff, Sam, are kind of working that behind the scenes, but from our vantage point, we don't really know anything more than what we hear at this committee or offline. I think there could be value in allowing the project delivery folks to at least try to help figure out what that cost to complete full picture looks like with the 12R, the available RTA revenue that James is tracking and such. And not to step on the toes of the RTA board necessarily, but to expect them to be able to navigate that may not be necessarily realistic. I trust that they're going to need input from you and your technical staff. I guess I would say there may be other technical staff and others that have lived through the programming process for years that may be able to provide valuable.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. And I don't think I heard a question in there, but I'll try to bring it back to the item we're talking about here. So to your point, Paul, there are some holes, and when we talk about programming funds, I think the TIP subcommittee can play a role in that. I also believe there is a role of the RTA board because they need to provide some policy direction on how some of these funds are programmed. And I'll give you a really good example is First Avenue Grant to River is, it's short. It's short probably by, probably double what is programmed right now. Is not going to be delivered, anytime soon. We're in the DCR phase, still have to do full design. Yet there's, $63 million of RTA funds programmed on it. So maybe there is that those monies could be used to plug other holes that are more immediate before we start trying to shore up that. So that's an example where I think a more holistic conversation by the TIP subcommittee in this group could be helpful. But again, we need that direction from the board to be able to have the flexibility to make some of those recommendations. Jamie?
If I may, yeah, Mr. Creo, members of the committee, just kind of going back to the comments about staff and some roadblocks, and we understand that we do have differences of opinion on certain things, but I would hope that we would also recognize that there are some projects I think we've been moving very quickly and been very successful in partnering with our member agencies. With regard to Valencia, my understanding is we were really just looking at the admin code, making sure everything was compliant for that. We had I think a disagreement in terms of how that was interpreted, but just want to put that out there that we're not trying to stand in the way of these projects. Thanks.
Thanks, Jamie.
So there's about 100 million in 12.6, that James also mentioned, over 150 million of TPT. I think one of my questions the last time was, is that bearing interest? What are we doing with the interest? I know that might not be with this item and you may not have those numbers, but I would like to hear how we're making the most of the interest and hopefully we're earning it because, this should be $10 million of interest a year probably. And I don't know what we're doing with that revenue.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, Ms. Skinner, members of the committee. Yes. So The revenues reports, we report out a total. And there's actually a detailed chart that shows all the different sources of those revenues. That total includes the interest, the treasurer's interest income that we are receiving. And I think I wrote down the amount that we're currently receiving monthly, just in case this question came up. Let's see, about 300 to 400,000 a month is accruing in interest. So, you know, we would have to come back with more details, but when we're showing that our actuals are exceeding projection, I think a lot of that can be attributed to just interest that's being accrued based on a large balance. So if we didn't have a large balance, we wouldn't have as much interest, and maybe the actuals would actually not be coming in.
Is that the balance for the 12.6 and the TPT, or is that just?
Oh, I'm
which one
sorry.
is
Did
it?
you ask about 12.6? I was reporting on 12.6. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And so is there, I would assume there's something similar for the TPT interest.
James, do you have in terms of interest?
There is, I don't have that information today, but we do have it, that is available in report later.
And so if I may just to follow on, so when we started, resumed the TIP development process last fall, and we looked at how much was of HERF 12.6 was committed to projects, and then what that difference was between the HERF account balance, we saw that we were under-programmed, right? We were overly conservative during the last TIP development cycle due to COVID. And also we were accruing interest. So we actually took the balance, that difference, and we added it to the programming exercise. And we anticipate being able to do the same thing if, again, we come out ahead of projections during the next TIP development cycle. We'll make sure that we identify those unprogrammed funds for that process.
All right, any other questions on this item? Catherine, you were one of the initiators of this item. Did you have anything else, or did you have any additional information you'd like to request?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Catherine. All right, hearing none, we will move on to item 6, update on the regional active transportation plan. Anna Oden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm actually going to turn it over to Chris Joannes from Kinley-Horn.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for having me this morning. My name is Chris Joannes. I'm a transportation planner with Kinley-Horn, and I'm the consultant project manager on the Regional Active Transportation Plan. And we just wanted to give you an update on our progress on the project to this point and let you know what to expect coming up over the next few months. So I have a presentation here I'll walk through. I'll try to keep it to about 15 minutes or so. So first here. This is where I point at Crystal, sorry. A quick agenda. So we'll give a brief overview of the RITP. It's probably been a while since you've seen anything on it or heard about it. So we'll cover that. We've also completed 2 working papers that cover a lot of existing conditions information. We just received final comments on those from PAG staff this week. And so we'll be updating that and getting it back out to first our technical working group and then posted to our website for public review. So we'll walk through what's included in each of those, and then I'll give you a quick update on next steps. I don't know if this works or not. All right, so an overview on the project. There we go. So overall, a few kind of high-level goals about the project. First is developing comprehensive region-wide existing conditions data. PAG had some active transportation data at the regional level, but a lot rests with each of the individual member agencies in different formats and different levels of completeness. And so a goal is to put together region-wide comprehensive data sets that PAG and member agencies can use for planning purposes in the future beyond the RITP. Establishing a regional active transportation vision. So what do we actually want this build-out network of active transportation facilities to look like over the next 10, 20, 30 years? And then within that, prioritizing active transportation investments. So what should we target first? What are our highest priorities? Another big piece is establishing preferred active transportation treatments. We're actually going to be developing, you'll see in the scope, an active transportation toolbox that we would hope will be a really good resource to member agencies to be able to draw from and have consistent facilities as you move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction throughout the region. And finally, a really big one is just building momentum for building active transportation infrastructure in the region. We have a pretty extensive public engagement piece of this project, as well as quite a bit of stakeholder engagement. And so we hope that this really starts the momentum of either modifying upcoming projects to have enhanced active transportation facilities or identifying really exciting standalone active transportation projects that the public and elected officials are really excited about, so we can start moving forward into the implementation phase. So next, a brief overview of our scope of work. So as I mentioned, those first two tasks there, vision, goals, and objectives, as well as regional connectivity analysis, we're largely complete on. The next step here is regional corridor identification and evaluation. So I'll have a bit more detail, but we're just wrapping up a very thorough analysis of active transportation data, as well as other data sources to help us start to figure out where we should be developing and prioritizing active transportation projects region-wide. Moving forward from that, that's that active transportation toolbox where we're going to be developing preferred treatments and design standards that should be a resource to member agencies going forward. Next, after that, we're going to attempt to measure the carbon reduction benefits that if we were to implement this vision network of active transportation improvements, how we would reduce the carbon emissions region-wide. And finally, developing the final report is that final task there. As I mentioned, we have public engagement going on throughout. We do have a website that is up. It's a page on PAG's existing website that allows people to access the public engagement materials, sign up for future updates, and once we have completed some of our interim documents, they'll be able to review those along the way as well. Next slide, please. A quick overview of our schedule. We're coming up on the halfway point here. We are currently in the midst of our first round of public engagement. I'll talk about it more here in a minute. That we have done some in-person engagement events, and we're getting ready to launch our virtual engagement. That next phase of public engagement will come shortly after, once we have developed an initial project list to get feedback from people on if that is the right direction in their mind or if there's anything we missed along the way. And finally, once we have the draft plan, just really trying to push information out there, letting people know that this is a resource for the region and guiding active transportation decisions, and building momentum for implementation after the plan. So diving into our first working paper here, vision, goals, and objectives. So these are the topic areas that were covered, and we'll step through each of these really briefly, but essentially we were building to what are the regional vision, goals, objectives, performance measures that the PAG region will be following in order to make active transportation decisions going forward, as well as developing some illustrative renderings that we hope help convey to elected officials and the public what these potential active transportation treatments could look like, even if there's not an example from the Tucson region today. Next slide, please. So the first thing we did as part of this was reviewing a whole host of plans done by PAG or member agencies over the last several years, ranging from any active transportation plans that may have been done by member agencies to more comprehensive transportation plans to general and comprehensive plans, to see what goals related to active transportation have already been put out there from PAG or member agencies in the past, so we can make sure that we're incorporating that into any of our goals going forward. Some big trends and themes that we saw from that was ensuring collaboration between agencies, providing a continuous active transportation network between agencies, improving access to major activity centers and making sure that people have options when trying to access those, as well as more interconnectivity between the active transportation network and the transit network so that they can help support each other. We did a very high level safety analysis at this point, looking at regional statistics. We do a much more comprehensive in-depth safety analysis in an upcoming phase here. But overall, some really key takeaways. This is looking at all pedestrian and bicycle related crashes region-wide. You can see that while bicycle crashes have become less frequent over the 5-year period between 2018 and 2022, pedestrian crashes are actually increasing slightly year over year. A trend that we saw is bicyclist crashes happened mostly during the day, midday and early evening, while pedestrian crashes are largely happening at night. I will note that this is also a trend seen across the entire state as well, so it's not a Tucson region specific issue that we're seeing this trend. The bottom left there, so about a little over half of crashes are pedestrian crashes versus bicycle crashes. They're a bit more prevalent. And you can see slightly over half of crashes happen in daylight, but about 30% happen in dark or either lighted or non-lighted areas. So definitely nighttime is a factor when you consider that most trips are probably taken during daylight hours. You'll also see at the bottom right there, we looked at potential influence on active transportation crashes. And you'll see that while bicyclist crashes largely no impairment is by far the largest group. Pedestrians, on the other hand, we're seeing a lot of inebriation, whether it's from alcohol or drugs. And that also factors into that happening more frequently at night. And so anecdotally, a lot of things we hear, somebody crossed the street after being at the Circle K to purchase liquor or something like that. That is a theme we hear statewide and an issue that is actually very challenging for us to address. Yeah.
I have a question about the influence. All of them just bicyclists.
Yes. The bicycle or pedestrian.
And that's all crashes for all bike and ped crashes?
Yes, bike and
I would
ped crashes.
guess that many of those have no impairment. So assessment taken by the officer.
For the bicyclist ones. It's possible, yeah. We are reliant on the crash data submitted by the agency to the ADOT system, so correct. Yep. Did you? Okay. Sure. Okay. We did a very high level health overview as well, kind of setting a baseline for the overall region here as far as some health outcomes, looking at obesity, asthma, diabetes, mental health, and cardiovascular health. These are all things that increased use of active transportation has been shown to mitigate to some level. It's definitely not going to make a huge swing, but these are all things that we would want to track going forward to see if the investments in active transportation are having an impact on these metrics. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we are in the midst of our first round of public engagement. We've done 4 events you can see there in the top left already over the summer. So starting in late July, going through the end of August. We really strived with these to meet people where they are. So we are not holding standalone open houses or public meetings. We're really trying to get the word out at different events that are already happening around the region. And we did strive also to get both geographic and audience diversity amongst those different events that we attended. And so as we go forward, when we have 2 more rounds of public engagement coming up, we're going to keep using this strategy of really trying to promote it for people that may or may not normally engage in a planning process. Our virtual engagement should be launching here very shortly. We're just getting final approvals from PAG staff to push that all out, but we do have a press release, social media content, email blast language, flyers. All of that has been prepared in draft form. And so PAG through their channels will be helping to push that content out. We'll also be working with our technical working group to push this out through member agency, social media, and other resources as well. So a big conclusion from all of the previous plan research we did and national best practice research was developing a vision statement and goals. Our vision is the PAG region will develop and maintain an active transportation network that is safe, comfortable, and convenient for residents, employees, and visitors. You can see we also developed 6 goals. Under each of those goals, I didn't want to step through all of these with you today and bore you to death, but we do have objectives within each of those, and then a quantitative performance metric that goes with each of those. And so we're really trying to set PAG and you all as member agencies up for success to be able to continue to track progress towards these and make adjustments as needed if we're not trending in the right direction. So I'll briefly step through each of those. So number 1 really focuses on developing guidelines to provide consistent active transportation infrastructure. So people don't really know or care which jurisdiction they're in as they're traveling throughout the transportation system. They're just trying to get from where they are to where they're going, and making sure that they know what to expect and how to act when they interact with vehicle traffic, regardless of where they are, is quite important. Number 2, ensuring that active transportation facilities are maintained after they're built. Number 3, collecting and tracking data to support data-driven decision-making. Number 4, prioritizing active transportation infrastructure to get to major activity centers around the region. Number 5, promoting active transportation that supports mobility, access, health, and improved air quality. And number 6, helping to identify funding to actually implement these, whether it be through regional funds, through PAG itself, or identifying local, state, or federal funding opportunities to help actually move into the design and implementation phases of these projects. As I mentioned, another element of this first working paper was trying to show people what different active transportation facilities could look like. I know a lot of these are already present in the PAG region, but we wanted to, in a standardized way, show people side to side what the differences are between these different treatments. So when we're throwing these terms out in our public engagement phase, people can picture what we're talking about and indicate back to us what their preferred treatment types are. So quick snapshot there. Not as of yet, but that will be part of when we're nailing down what our project list is. We'll be developing planning level costs at that point. Okay, next slide. I think this one, it's an old version where they didn't get swapped out. We did do a couple crossing illustrations that didn't get updated here, but we have those available as well in the working paper. So next slide, another piece that was somewhat similar to those other illustrative renderings is what would a large transformational active transportation investment look like to help people picture? So don't pay attention to the specific location this actually is. I'll give you a hint, it's Swan and Sunrise, but we're not really telling people what it is so they don't dive too deep into the location and start looking at, individual turning movements or, context around it. But so if we were to go full out and say, how do we really make this a much more pleasant place for pedestrians and cyclists to be? What could it look like? So here is a before picture, and then the next slide shows an after picture. So you can see we've really tightened up what the intersection looks like. We've introduced protected bicycle lanes that are actually up at curb level behind a buffer. We've included each of those right turn ramps there actually has a raised crossing in it to make the pedestrian and cyclists more prominent as they're crossing over those ramps, and also slows people down while making turns. So you see this is really elevates pedestrians and cyclists, even in an environment where it's typically going to be very hostile to them. Next slide, please. We have one more example. So this is another one. So looking at an older part of town where streets are maybe a little bit smaller, but still active transportation hasn't been prioritized a whole lot. This is the before. If you go to the next slide, you'll see an after. So Again, tightening up curb radii, making more space for pedestrians in the right of way, slowing people down on that channelized right turn with the raised crossing, introducing the green markings for bicycle lanes and conflict zones between bicycles and pedestrians. So what we intend to use these for is really just to show people this is what, if we really invested in active transportation, how we could change the public realm to make it a lot more pleasant and interesting to be out in the public right of way when you're not in a motor vehicle. Next slide, please. So that was our first working paper. Our second one is regional connectivity. If you go to the next slide there, you'll see that in this, we dove back into those previous plans and looked at what actual recommendations have been. We did a quick peer region analysis. We developed our regional database of active transportation GIS data, looked at equity focus areas, and a very high level gap analysis of active transportation facilities. So again, we'll step through those really quick. When we looked back at those previous plans and started pulling out active transportation recommendations, what we found is there were 113 pedestrian improvements recommended, 247 bicycle improvements, 50 active transportation crossing improvements, 2 transit connectivity improvements. We did find that 22 of those recommendations are actually already programmed for funding, either through the member agency itself or through PAG. And there were a handful of policy recommendations as well. And so these will be, when we start looking at the priority locations, the first thing we're going to do is go back and look and see if there's already been a recommended project there to see if that addresses the need that we're seeing before we start developing our own new recommendations out of whole cloth. Next slide, please. So this, not expecting you to see it, but we wanted to show we did also map all of these in GIS so that PAG and member agencies can see geographically, and this can get provided out at the end of the process where all of these recommendations actually live in space and how they may interact with one another. So this took, 20 some plans worth of recommendations and puts them all together. Next slide, please. Another thing we did was look at peer regions to the Tucson area. And the way we went about this is we looked at those commute, bike, and walk shares, and we were trying to find regions that had a higher one than Tucson to see what they've been doing from potentially a policy standpoint that is helping to increase that share of commuting trips. And what was really interesting when we looked at regions getting a little bit bigger from the Tucson area, getting a little bit smaller, is that Tucson actually has an exceptionally high bike and walk commute share already. So we actually had to stretch quite far. You'll see in the overall metro area populations there, either quite far up or quite far down to find other regions that had as high of a bike and walk commute share as Tucson does. So I think that number one is a kudos to this region for investing heavily in this infrastructure already. But so you'll see what we selected was Portland, Oregon, Madison, Wisconsin, San Diego, California. Those are some high level statistics there, but on the next slide, what you'll see is we took a deep dive, particularly into the core city of each region to see what are some potential policies that they have done that the Tucson region may have not. And so on the right side of the screen there, you'll see we have a table like this for each one of those peer agencies that specifically looks at policies from their code or subdivision ordinance and shows whether it's been implemented in the Tucson region or not. On the left side, there are some kind of top level conclusions that we've come to as things that may be a focus for policy adjustments in the future. So implementing active transportation goals into code, specifically setting equal modal priority. So making sure that active transportation is being considered at the same level as other modes of travel, and then promoting the importance of shared mobility to help get people out of their cars for those shorter trips. Next slide, please. So probably the biggest what I would see biggest benefit to this process to date is getting this comprehensive regional data set that you all can use in the future. So you'll see here those different elements that we collected. These are all assembled into a couple GIS files that we can certainly provide at the end of the process here. So functional classification, number of vehicle travel lanes, average annual daily traffic, one-way street locations, speed limits, sidewalk and shared use paths, their presence and their width, where there's on-street parking, if there's shoulders, what that width is, and if it's able to be used as an active transportation facility, and then bicycle facility types and widths. And all of this is feeding directly into our very detailed analysis, which actually we just got our draft results on Friday, and we have a technical working group meeting tomorrow afternoon back in this same room here to work through the results of that with staff, make sure that it lines up with their expectations, see if there's any adjustments we need to make, and then start beginning to identify priority locations where we need to develop some active transportation projects. Next slide, please. Equity is a huge piece of active transportation planning. It's also extremely important, as I'm sure you all know, with obtaining federal funds. So we wanted to stick very closely to federal resources that are already out there for identifying areas where equity needs to be at the forefront of decision making. And so we looked at the Equitable Transportation Community, or ETC Explorer tool, as well as the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, or CEJST. These are both produced by USDOT and FHWA, and these are used very heavily when reviewing federal grant applications for prioritizing investments in these communities. So those are reflected in here as well. And then at this point, we did a very, very high level gap analysis of areas that appeared to have a relatively dense street network, or areas where there might be some active transportation need but aren't really providing those facilities. This is really for high level informational purposes, but we are doing a very detailed gap analysis down at the actual corridor and infrastructure level as part of our next phase of the project here. As I mentioned, we just got draft results and we'll be working through that later this week. Next slide. So where are we going next? So our public engagement, as I mentioned, should be launching here in September. And that will probably go for about 4 weeks or so. Also beginning in September, we are presenting the results of those detailed analyses. You can see there we've done level of traffic stress, equity and public health analysis, regional travel patterns to identify where there's short distance trips that could be converted from vehicle to active transportation, a more detailed safety analysis, and a connectivity analysis. So that will be presented to our technical working group tomorrow afternoon to start vetting those with the group and making sure that we've hit all the data analysis we need to start our decision-making process. Starting late October, more likely early November, we'll begin our second round of public engagement. In the meantime, we'll be doing our active transportation toolbox. We're developing that outline right now, which will be followed up by a stakeholder meeting with representatives from PAG and member agencies to start figuring out what is going to go into that toolbox as far as preferred treatments and design standards. November to January timeframe, we're going to be measuring that carbon reduction benefit based on our recommended project list. And then January through April, developing the final plan and then taking that through the approvals process. Next slide. That is all I have for this morning, and I'm happy to take any further questions on the RITP. Sure.
Slide 16, the slide where you referenced the plans that we were doing. I do think there are a couple that were missing.
Okay.
One of them is the Prosperity Initiative, which is about the federal county and city of Tucson.
Okay.
It has a transportation element in it. I don't know if it's too late for that, but I think it's important, especially for equity purposes, that that one be included. And then, you know, we do have climate plans. The city has the Tucson Resilient Together plan, and the county has the Priority Climate Action Plan.
Okay.
Since this is being funded with carbon reduction program funds, and there is an emphasis on that, I think those plans should also be considered. And I know the city's plan there are over 100 measures, many of them transportation related, that really should be reviewed as part of this analysis as well.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you.
Any other questions? Counselor?
Yeah, to piggyback on that, Marana's wrapping up their transportation master plan. And I didn't notice that one identified.
When we were doing the analysis, we didn't quite have goals or a project list quite yet, but if you're coming to the conclusion of that and those are both in pretty good shape, we're happy to add those to our previously recommended project list, as well as reviewing any active transportation goals for that as well.
Yeah, that would be good. We actually just, it will be going to council on the 1st of October.
Okay.
So in a couple of weeks, we actually just completed a project too, where we connected 1.8 mile stretch that now connects Marana's trail system to the entire Pima County loop system. So we also have that connectivity that was just.
Yeah, we can definitely review that and make sure it's been included in our regional database. Thank you.
Andy?
Thank you. I'm just want to say I'm glad that the region is investing in this. I think it's really important. I come from a transportation planning background, so I believe in the value and merit of it. I think I'm proud that the city's done a lot in this area already, and it seems like we're integrating some of that. It seems very infrastructure focused, and that's good. I think I'm someone I would, in terms of encouraging more active transportation, maybe we'd say from 20% is on, or 80%, 90% is on infrastructure. But don't want to forget that, active transportation may be unique to other modes. It's important. I think we used to talk about those 5 E's, right? Encouragement, education, other things, policy statements and stuff. So is that included in some area, especially if we're looking to this plan to structure ourselves for future funding? I know we're talking about RMAP right now, and including, projects for safety education campaigns, encouragement initiatives, community engagement support around activity. That's a big complement to a suite of active transportation investments. And so I want to make sure that is included in a regional plan, especially because I think those sorts of activities live best at the regional level, where safety education, encouragement, programs like that can really impact regional is close to just very.
Yes, so we're including that in a couple points, and definitely going to be relying on City of Tucson and things that you have found to be impactful in the past to draw from. So as I mentioned, when we were doing our previous plan review, there were a few policy recommendations in there. We definitely want to carry those forward and supplement those with any other national best practices that we found, anything that you all as member agencies have done that you found to be successful either on the safety front, encouragement front. We definitely want to include that and vet that through the regional process. And if it's something we believe is transportable around the region, we absolutely want to include that. The other piece is our public engagement and getting feedback from a wide variety of people to see, you noticed in our public engagement events, it's focused on things like 5Ks and bike rides, and those are, largely for recreational purposes. People are not also using a bike to commute or go about their daily business. If there's a reason that we hear from them that maybe we haven't thought of that's preventing them from using active transportation more widely than that, we definitely want to hear that from people as well.
Piggybacking on that, what is your plan to make sure that in your public outreach process that you're reaching people of color, people under the age of 50, people who maybe English is their second language? How are you making sure those folks are engaged?
Yeah, so as part of our engagement platform, we do get some demographic information from that. We also have some optional demographic questions that go along with our virtual survey. If we're finding that we're not reaching certain people, I forgot to mention, everything's bilingual that we're putting out there. So everything is in English and Spanish. If we're not reaching a group that we feel is incredibly important when we compare it to our regional demographics, we do have some options for targeting things like social media ads or doing some more follow-up events in those communities or at locations where we feel like we would get more representation from those groups. We're being very flexible with our engagement to make sure that we are both measuring it along the way and then pivoting if needed to do more targeted outreach in that way.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And to add to what Chris said, we also are working with Gordley on this project as well. So they're sub-consultants at Kinley Horn. So we're working closely with with those experts to make sure that we hit just that target.
Thank you. Captain.
Public outreach, just to piggyback, I know that the survey was when does that close and when will we get, initial results from that survey in terms of the demographics we captured?
Sure. We're getting final approval soon, hopefully, to start pushing that out. We're going to try and leave that out for about 4 to 6 weeks once it gets launched. So our schedule is going to move a little bit here, but weekly throughout that, we're going to be looking at the demographics we've been getting through those optional demographic questions, as well as anything we can gather from our engagement platforms themselves. And if we need to change how we're advertising or do another push in some specific way, we'll be doing that.
I was speaking of the one that I thought closed like September 5th or 6th. There was one that showed the pedestrian crossings, the different, protected bike lane features. That one went out unclosed already. So are there any results from that?
We have, so you can technically get to our map and everything right now. And we did our in-person results, but we haven't actually closed it because we haven't pushed out the virtual engagement, like the advertisements yet. So nothing has closed, but we did, you might be thinking about the slide, which was previously recommended projects that had those enumerated, the different pedestrian ones.
I was thinking of one that I got in an email that I clicked the link and took the survey because it was closing the next day. That's the one I'm thinking of. And it showed those pictures.
Okay.
And that had demographics.
It hasn't actually closed. So.
You got to take it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we've been we launched our engagement, and then PAG staff came back and said they wanted to do some additional review on the virtual materials that were being sent out. So we did kind of a mini push with our in-person engagement, but we're still waiting to follow up to do a really big push through virtual channels, social media, media outlets, that sort of thing. So it's still the same content, but in large, same map where you drop the pinpoints and everything. Yeah.
When is the next RITP meeting that we're gonna have?
The technical working group one tomorrow afternoon. I hope you got an invite.
I don't have it on my calendar, but okay, I'll check that. I had a couple of things. One is that you're talking about commuter outreach to commuters, and I do think that that's really important piece to something like this. We don't want to make facilities that are just designed for recreational purposes. It's going to be much better, especially for carbon reduction purposes, to get people to commute these ways. So I will just remind you that PAG has a travel reduction program where they have they survey the largest employers every year and have contacts at all the largest employers in Pima County. So it might be good to do some outreach to those employers to actually, and you've already got that structure in place to do that. So I would encourage you to do that to try to get that kind of data for commuters specifically. The other thing is, you said you're going to be doing more outreach. Ciclovia has about 50,000 people, I think, every year. And I think that's going to be on October 27th. It's a transportation related event. Being there, I think, would be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll add on, we're also kicking off the PAG microtransit study, and we're going to try to be overlapping those engagement pieces where we can, because we do see there being some overlap between people who would be interested in both projects. And so making sure that we're promoting both projects simultaneously so that we're not trying not to reach out to people back to back, project after project. And so that gives us another opportunity while those engagement periods are going on to continue to collect information on RITP as well.
Maybe just a placeholder for tomorrow, not necessarily needing to be answered today, but I'm really curious about the regional connectivity analysis being complete and how the public input has or has not or will not feed into that. I would expect that the users would have a pretty good understanding of where there are connectivity challenges that we should hear from. And then, the series of evaluation analyses that you mentioned in one of your slides level of stress, equity and public health, travel pattern, safety, and connectivity. Will you be going through methodologies for those with the advisory committee? And I think it should be called an advisory committee, so you call it the RAT Pack.
Obvious missed opportunity on our part.
I want these types of things to be repeatable as we go forward, so that we can kind of refresh, a gap analysis and not have to stand that whole thing up in the form of a large plan, but rather just say, look at the methodology, let's refresh that in 3 years, 5 years, whatever. So I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that tomorrow, but I'm hoping that we'll hear some of those recommendations, how to make the analyses, things that can live on after we complete this plan, so that individual jurisdictions can kind of do their own, region-wide analysis and maybe pull in additional factors that might be important to the city of Tucson or Pima County to do a kind of a supplemental analysis.
Yes, so. Yep, well, we will be talking about that extensively tomorrow. We will have Alta Planning and Design, who's our other sub-consultant besides Gordley. They will be there virtually to walk through the initial results as well as the methodology of that. We've already had some back and forth with PEG staff on the level of traffic stress analysis and tweaking that methodology a little bit. So yes, absolutely, all of those will be presented, and we can make adjustments as needed to those to make it a little more locally specific if needed. So thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Just one more thing to add. Part of the connectivity analysis was using that Acopia data that we acquired through a different process. And I know Mead has reached out to many of you to do some QA/QC on that. We've had a great partnership ongoing with Oro Valley specifically, who their staff is getting in there and really looking at those results to make sure that there, some ground truthing going on there as well. So we encourage all of you, if you haven't been part of that QA/QC, or if you have a staff member that is particularly skilled in that, to reach out to Mead or myself. And all of that information is also feeding into this study. So both of those efforts are kind of combined. So it's really a good opportunity to utilize your knowledge and your in-house experts to help on this as well.
Great, thank you. All right, any other questions on this item? All right, thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate it. We'll move on to item 7, 2055 Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan Update. Jeanette and/or Hannah.
Yes, I'll go ahead and do it today. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the TPC. Last month was our big month for our maps. So because you guys were able to make some forward progress on that project list, that has gone on to our data science team as well as our GIS team. And they're working very hard on the land use model and the activity-based model, as well as getting our GIS data sets all ready to go. So once that project list gets approved, there's a lot of technical work that goes into being able to execute the ABM. So over the past few weeks, that background technical work has been taking place. And so we're really thankful that this committee took that action last month. We had a management committee meeting last week and received some feedback on our public outreach and got some great suggestions for opportunities where we could reach out, continue to do our public outreach for the long range plan. So we will have a presence for the RMAP outreach at Tucson Meet Yourself. We also have a event on October 10th at Del Rio Center. And we are working with the U of A to get some feedback from the student population. So we're setting those up. October is shaping up to be a pretty busy public outreach month. As Chris mentioned, there's RATP public outreach. We have RMAP public outreach, as well as microtransit. So keep your eyes and ears open for those events. There will be a lot of piggybacking to make sure we just make the most of our time out in the community. We also have an event at the end of October at the South Tucson Library. We're also looking to form some smaller focus groups, and that might also carry on to some of the other planning efforts, but definitely as part of our outreach. If you have any questions on those events or additional suggestions, please reach out to Melanie Lawson or myself or Hannah. We really do appreciate those comments and that feedback. Other than that, Hannah and I are busy writing the text, so we're kind of at the fun stage where we're putting this thing together so that once we get the results of the model and some of the other preliminary results together, we can start bringing that to the committees. Ideally, you'll start seeing some of that stuff at this committee probably early next year. And of course, we're targeting the final approval for May of 2026. So we're on track and we're just going to keep plugging along on these technical elements. But if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Jeanette. Any questions on RMAP?
If I may, Mr. Chair, did you say the final approval May of 2026?
Of 2025. Good catch, Jamie. Hey, my head. Thank you, Jamie. Yes, next year.
Any other questions on this item?
A quick one, I think we may have covered it before, but that it assumes the RTA next revenues and projects, so the projects are taking proposed projects right now are included in the list as a result.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, yes, it was a continuation of the sales tax and the projects that are in that tentative list are in.
And should that, it looks like 2025 is interesting. Around the same time, we're looking to see if that becomes reality sooner rather than later. Should it not at that time, is there, do we need to amend the RMAP to remove that fiscal constraint and budget supporting there? How does that work?
Yes, that's correct. So if it doesn't pass, we will have to do an amendment to the long range plan and change that assumption. We'd have to work closely with FHWA. Technically, we have until January of 26 to have the RMAP approved. So, you know, we'll have a little bit of time to kind of rethink through what the project list should be, where we can make some cuts. And then, of course, we'd have to run the models again. And so that's really where that time is of the essence. But, you know, should that happen, you know, there'll definitely be a lot more discussions with the committee and management committee as well on, you know, what approach we want to take. So stay tuned for more. Hopefully it passes and we won't be in that situation, but if not, we'll regroup.
Any other questions for Jeanette? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to item 8, future agenda items. There was actually one catch, you know, obviously the meeting summary has been approved now, but I noticed that the list of future agenda items dropped off that was included on the July meeting summary. So I'd ask that these be included for today's meeting summary, and they are as follows: discussion on programming CRP funds, discussion on performance-based planning and programming, discussion on how amendments can be made to the current RMAP, which may be a moot point here soon, analyzing greenhouse gas emissions in project selection, and review of the TPC bylaws. Did anyone else have any other future agenda items to add to that list? All right, hearing none, we'll move to item 9, adjournment. Meeting stands adjourned, 10:01. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
But everybody who's still here, just a heads up, our conference room is going to be